Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Let's Talk Security Testing, the podcast where we talk all things security testing. And we are back talking about whether AI could replace a pen tester. What's your thoughts? Replacing a pen tester?
Replacing a pen tester in what though, right? I think there's the conversation to be had about what jobs are currently done by a person that can be automated, and then there's the conversation about whether you can wholesale swap something out, and I think those are two very, very different
No,
things.
let's jump into it. Can AI hack things?
Well, I tried this the other day, right? There's a tool out there that touts that it's able to automatically identify vulnerabilities, and I mean, it didn't work was the first thing, which was a bit of a shame. Digging into it, it looks like it's half finished, and even when it does get finished, I think they're running into roadblocks where the OpenAI is putting in guardrails to actually prevent them from using it to try and hack things.
Oh, yeah.
But even if it did do all of that, the kinds of things that it's trying to show off its capability to do are the kinds of things that we don't need AI to do anyway, right? Find SQL injection, brilliant. SQL map has existed for, I don't know, 10, 20 years, something like that. So yeah, I mean, AI, there is some indication that it maybe can hack some things, but...
Yeah, but like obviously guardrails. If AI could dynamically attack a web application, that's going to make an attacker's job even easier. Had that got into the wrong hands, but with your understanding of large language models, and I mean, look, for me, a mere simpleton, the concept of large language models, it's all to do with text and language, and yeah, we can do some funny things with photos and videos, but can it think? Can it drive a system theoretically? Are we in a position where this is the type of technology that could do pen testery activities?
Okay, yeah, let's deconstruct that a little bit. AI can certainly drive systems in a way that traditional automation struggles to be able to do. So a web app is a great example, right? Web apps, it's especially modern web apps, it's quite difficult to be able to crawl through them in any sort of a logical sense, right? You can make the API calls, you can even select and click every single button on the application, but actually working through it in a way that a person does is a very, very difficult thing to do without some comprehension of what that application is supposed to do. And models certainly are capable of being able to actually do that reasoning comprehension exercise. Models can also think of edge cases. I use the word think, but models are capable of coming up with edge case conditions that sometimes a human might struggle to imagine, and therefore working through those processes can start to find breaking vulnerabilities. But I don't think the technology is anywhere near at the maturity level to be able to reliably find issues, and where it is showing the most promise, like I say, are in the vulnerabilities that we've already kind of solved.
Yeah, I mean, if we look at a junior pen tester and the journey they have to go on to become a senior pen tester, to be able to confidently and comprehensively assess systems, what does that path look like, and how does that maybe track? So I guess what I'm digging into here is, like, I'm assuming, first week on the job, you start to learn what things mean and what certain vulnerabilities are, and as you go on, slowly but surely, you develop an understanding of how to compromise these certain things. Is that simply the journey that AI needs to go on in terms of, because I know when we were looking at these a few months ago, there was a sort of shift between different types of vulnerability that it could feasibly find versus others that were maybe a bit more difficult.
It's a really, really difficult question. I think there's a lot of unknown quantities in there. The depth of our understanding about how these things work still doesn't exist enough to be able to say confidently. I think what we can say, what models are brilliant at, is like they don't get writer's block in a traditional sense, right? People always use models for like writing copy, and they don't get writer's block. If you say give me 100 ideas, it will give you 100 ideas, and if you say give me 100 more, it will give you 100 more. If you ask a person to do that, they'll probably get stuck somewhere
Slap
at that
you
point.
in the face.
And models models don't slap you in the face yet, um, but they do keep coming up with ideas, which means that they are really really capable of coming up with edge cases, which is what us as testers are typically looking for, things that a developer didn't imagine that we might be able to make a system to do. However, models are not, as far as our understanding goes, particularly good at coming up with novel ideas. They're not particularly good at coming up with things that haven't been seen before, right? Because all they can do is go off of their existing training data, which means that finding those most niche edge cases, which are often the most important ones to be able to find, the ones that nobody's imagined before, I think the jury's still out, and I would lean towards they're probably not great at being able to find those kinds of issues. But for a junior pen tester, yeah, it's a great opportunity, I think, to be able to say, okay, you have a run at this system, you see if you can, you think of the things that you might want to test for, and then supplement that with the things that a model can do in a co-pilot kind of a context, to be able to say, have you thought of this, have you thought of that, have you thought of the other, not replacing them, because eventually they should accelerate beyond that and really start thinking about the novel, but supplementing them until they're maybe at the level that we're needing them to be.
I think it's interesting because certainly if we look at the other more obvious applications of AI in terms of sales and marketing, for example, certainly taking the human out of it and just comparing tool sets, previous tool sets like, I don't know, like email templating where you'd manually put email templates and allocate them in, like that versus using AI to do it. AI has already surpassed traditional mechanisms for doing that, right? And I think that just because today there are many problems with automated scanning, right? Many problems. And if you take Dast as one example, like just Google Dast and try and find some threads about it, and you don't tend to find incredibly positive things, generally speaking. Just because Dast could find SQL injection and AI maybe can but struggles to, how long is it going to be before AI because there's just such the ceiling is so much higher, right? So because of all the problems with Dast, AI has the possibility to improve on that. It's just getting the capability there.
Yeah, so I think that I don't necessarily see, for a large volume of the classes of vulnerabilities that we see inside applications, I don't necessarily see AI as surpassing what we've currently got, right? Because what we've currently got is actually pretty good when it comes to exploiting the vulnerabilities if you know where they are. What I think is probably better is a hybrid approach, right? Where we have the models interacting with applications, because they're much more versatile in being able to interact with applications than a traditional tool. And then when there is a smell of the opportunity for a particular kind of vulnerability, as we might say, to then orchestrate traditional testing capability. Now, that's only for a certain class of vulnerabilities, right? There are or a range of classes of vulnerabilities, cross-site scripting, SQL injection, like input validation kind of issues. There are then the vulnerability classes like business logic flaws that I don't think a traditional tool is ever really going to be capable of finding. And I do think that it is possible that we could find that models are capable of, to some extent, being able to find these kinds of vulnerabilities and actually extending the scanner coverage and capability. I've not seen anything yet that actually provably sort of reliably finds those kinds of things.
Do you think we'll enter a world, at least for a period of time, where the standard toolkit for automated pen testing will be a combination of DAST and AI, and then a human over the top.
Yeah, I mean, I think we will enter that. I don't think it's any time particularly soon, though, right? One of the biggest problems that we're trying to solve in the pen testing industry is our capability to communicate with other people, and most of the resources are going into being able to do that. I think that what we're relying on is other industries being able to evolve models to be able to do more than just that kind of communication piece, at which point we'll probably borrow from that and start leveraging some of these more sophisticated things. I'm not by any stretch an expert on where we're at in the wider AI, roadmap, and when we're likely to get these sort of um, levels of sophistication that we can then need in our industry. But what I do know is that that's pretty much how it's played out with every other technology. Sort of cybersecurity and security testing tend to be the last people to get to play with these kinds of tools, because we need it to work in technology before we can start to use it to abuse that technology.
Yeah, yeah, often seems to be the pattern that these things take. So I guess just to take it back a step in relation to the development life cycle, then is it then more obvious why we're starting to see AI transforming the static testing space, because it's more reading code rather than actually trying to discover and exploit dynamically?
Yeah, I think it's a perfect example. That technology is already being actively applied and heavily developed for the development community. You've got co-pilots, and you've got the hot button topic of vibe coding, where developers are actively using models to be able to generate and write the code. And the result of that is that we've got models now that are much, much better at being able to interpret code and understand how things fit together, which means that there is the potential for us to start thinking about a security application of it. We are starting to see models being used to do things like actually interact with a computer system, click around your desktop, click around your browser, and things like that, which does, I think, open up the possibility that we will see those being applied not just at code level but actually at runtime for security testing. But the technology is still only really being sort of fleshed out in its infancy in that.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. Makes sense. So, if AI, just going back to AI as a pen tester, because I think we've explored its capabilities to actually find the things. Let's talk about its capability then to. Can it do any of the actions of a pen tester?
Well, what are the actions of a pen tester, right? Let's work through it from start to finish. What is the first thing that a pen tester has to do?
Me as a pen tester.
You've worked in this industry for 10, 12 years, something like that.
Doesn't mean I was listening.
You know that every job starts with
recon.
Recon, sure.
Reconnaissance. Discovery, same thing, is it? No.
Yeah. I mean, it is. But even before that, right? Even before recon and discovery, you need
a scope.
Exactly, you need a scope, right? Can a model be used to generate a credible scope? Is, I think, an important question, and that, I think, is an exciting area where certainly I think there's opportunities not just to deliver what we're currently able to deliver, but enhance upon it. I've done experiments before. I started wondering whether or not I could create a chatbot that asks customers questions and build a scope off the back of that, because it would save me time. And then I started to realize, actually, that saving me time is not saving the customer time, and therefore I'm never going to convince them to do it. They like to talk to a person if they have to. But by interpreting the code base, by interpreting the development tickets, by interpreting a wealth of information that is already accessible to that customer, you can actually generate some pretty clear, well-defined scopes without ever having to have any human interaction, just by throwing it in. You ask a co-pilot to describe the system from the code base, and it does a pretty good job at being able to do that. and then you ask it to describe the kinds of testing that might need to be employed, or you just rely on a templated methodology. And what you've got there is a scope that is as good as a traditional scope, but has required no input apart from asking a model quickly to do that. So that's the scope.
I
right?
think even in the traditional space, I mean, having I like the word, I like the way you phrase credible scope, because that I'm sure people listening will have seen this before, but the sort of bare minimum in a pen testing house is kind of, scope section, URL and endpoints being attacked, day rate, day count. Whereas on the scoping call, the customer will more than likely have revealed areas they're particularly concerned about, risks they've had before. Now, this is no disrespect to the pen testers or often solution architects that are scoping these things, but losing that in translation, because it's very rarely the same person that's doing the test, losing that in translation can obviously be a challenge. But also, not even losing it in translation, but realistically, that information doesn't just need taken in; it needs refined and turned into something that can then be an instruction to maybe a more junior consultant, because just even a junior consultant being given that information might not necessarily be able to act on it in the most relevant way in the test. So I guess what you're describing here is taking a bunch of pieces of information from different people and turning it into something that is highly useful and I guess somewhat like an instruction manual in order to how to carry out this test and deliver the best results.
Yeah, it's exactly that, and doing it in a scalable and efficient way with as minimal human interaction as you possibly can. Right, you can accomplish something like that and save everybody on what would otherwise potentially be a half an hour scoping call with 8 people. So that's 4 hours worth of time plus then another hour of a tester writing it up.
This is actually really no different to how we see the application of AI in things like sales and marketing, because AI can research a prospect. AI can, to some extent, craft an email. Can do a lot of stuff, but I don't know if anyone's ever received a phone call from an AI agent yet. It's definitely not at the level expected for any sort of cold call or cold outreach.
It is able to keep scammers busy, though. I don't know if you've seen that.
Yes, I have. What way you can pretend to be like an old lady or something?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and he just loops back. Yeah, I get that. So yeah, I don't see this as being any different, really, in that AI is not yet doing stuff generally. It's helping, and it's far exceeding existing technology and processes at helping humans.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a fair definition of AI? I mean, not every industry. Some industries it's much more advanced in than others, but
Yeah, I think that is a fair one. I would say when you go as far to the right of the engagement as possible. That's the furthest to the left. When you go as far right as reporting and summarising your findings, I think you'll find that actually you can basically hand over the responsibility to models to be able to produce that kind of stuff. I don't think that anybody's got the same level of phobia about hallucinations and things that we used to have. As long as you're controlling that data in a way that means that you're not going to end up feeding in data that gets given to another customer or something like that,
yeah,
you'll find that actually these models can summarise very clearly, very precisely, very reliably what was identified during a test, how to go about fixing it, and then can do that talking at various different levels for various different audiences, and can even do that interaction with developers when they have a question to say, provide bespoke, specific, targeted advice and guidance to them. So, I honestly, I would say that a little bit of time and effort, and you can hand over that entire reporting, analysis, and post-test support to a model, and see a lot of success. The middle of the engagement, what we think about when we say, can it replace a pen tester? Is it able to find the vulnerabilities? Is it able to actually click around the applications and things like that? That's the area where there's certainly still, at best, a co-pilot, and if I'm honest, mostly just inspiration for a tester that I'm seeing success in, rather than actually replacing a tester in any of the individual actions being used.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. I think that'll probably do for today. I think we've covered a lot of the key talking points around. I think your job's safe for a while, Tom. AI is not taking over Pentesters for the time being. Yeah, I mean, thanks for everyone who's tuned in. I hope this was an interesting episode. I'll just say, actually, apologies that we haven't been able to get a game into this one. I know that's become a bit of a recurring theme. We actually, I think Tom alluded to it earlier, we did want to have a live hacking show, which I know that sounds like it might be a lot more interesting than what you've just heard. We wanted to do a live hacking show where Tom would use or I would run an AI hacking tool on a system that we've got that we know is vulnerable, and Tom would basically race against the clock to say who could exploit an issue fastest. But I think, as Tom mentioned before, we failed to get a single one working, and it wasn't for the want of trying. So I guess that tells you all you need to know for the time being. But watch this space. Who knows? It's moving fast. We could be sat here in 6 weeks, a year, and have a completely different story. But that's the live update. Thank you for listening, and we'll be back in a couple of weeks with the next episode of Let's Talk Security Testing.
Bye now.